Jake Morrison stood outside the huge doors of the Galactic Council meeting room. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. He was the first human ever to visit this place. The space station was bigger than any city on Earth. Jake felt very small. The doors opened slowly. Jake walked into a room so big he could not see the ceiling. Aliens from 12 different worlds sat in circles around a black throne in the center. Some aliens looked like tall ghosts with 4 arms. Others looked like giant lizards with colorful skin. Bug-like creatures with many eyes sat next to floating jellyfish beings. Jake had studied all these alien races before coming here. The Zephyrians were the tall ghost-like ones who ran most meetings. The Karathi were the big lizards who controlled the armies. The Vexhi looked like giant bugs and handled all the money and trade between worlds. A very old Zephyrian floated toward Jake. His name was Ambassador Kethavar. He had been alive for thousands of years. "Welcome, human," he said. "We have made a place for your kind to sit." Jake looked where the alien pointed. The humans got simple metal chairs at the very edge of the room. All the important aliens sat in fancy seats close to the black throne. The message was clear. Humans were not important here. The meeting started. Aliens talked about trade routes between star systems and wars on distant planets. They made decisions about billions of people without asking what those people wanted. Jake listened and took notes on his computer tablet. Finally, someone mentioned Earth. General Throck was a massive Karathi whose skin changed colors when he felt different emotions. Right now his scales were green, which meant he thought he was being generous. "The humans would be happy to let us mine their solar system," Throck said. "We will give them some farm tools and basic medicine in return." Jake stood up. His voice echoed in the huge room. "Wait a minute. We want to talk about this as equals, not as charity cases." Laughter filled the chamber. Not human laughter, but strange alien sounds that meant the same thing. A bug-like alien named Prime Merchant Ziktal clicked his mouthparts. "Equals? Your people have been in space for less than 50 years. Some of us have been alive longer than your entire history." Ambassador Kethvar raised one of his 4 hands for quiet. "The human shows spirit, but we have rules for helping primitive species join our civilization. These rules have worked for 10,000 years. The word primitive stung Jake more than he expected. He knew humans were newcomers to space travel, but hearing it said out loud made him angry. These aliens talked about humanity's future like they were discussing pets. The meeting went on for hours. Jake learned just how big the galactic civilization really was. The council controlled trade routes that connected hundreds of thousands of worlds. They kept peace between species that could destroy entire planets when they fought. They had technology that seemed like magic to humans. But something bothered Jake about how certain these aliens were. They acted like being old automatically made them wise. They thought having better technology made them better people. During a break in the meeting, Jake found himself standing near the black throne. "Amazing, is it not?" said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see Dr. Veltran, a Zephyrian who kept records for the council. Unlike the ambassador, this alien seemed genuinely curious about humans. "We believe the throne is over 50,000 years old. Has anyone ever sat in it?" Jake asked. Veltran's forearms moved in what Jake had learned was like a shrug. "Many have tried over the years. The throne has security systems. It was made to accept only those the creators thought were worthy. Since the architects disappeared, no one has been able to claim it. What happens when someone tries? The throne rejects them, sometimes violently." Veltran looked thoughtful, though the rejections have become less severe over time. Perhaps the throne grows tired of waiting. When the meeting started again, Jake kept looking at the empty throne. Something about it called to him. The golden lines running through the black stone seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He could swear he felt warmth coming from it even though he was sitting far away. The council session ended with nothing changed for humanity. They would stay as observers with no real voice in galactic affairs. Jake felt the weight of his whole species' hopes as he prepared to return to Earth with almost nothing to show for the trip. As the aliens began to leave, General Throck walked over to the human delegation with several other Karathi soldiers. The big lizard's scales had turned bright red, which Jake had learned meant amusement. "Tell me, human," Throck rumbled in a voice like grinding rocks. "What do you think of our council chamber?" "It's impressive," Jake replied carefully. "The building, the technology, the history. It's everything I hoped to see when Earth first made contact." "And the throne?" Throck pointed toward the center of the room with a clawed hand. "Surely someone from such an ambitious species has thoughts about the seat of galactic power." Jake sensed a trap but could not figure out what kind. It's an amazing artifact. Dr. Veltran was telling me about its history. Throck's scales got brighter red and other aliens turned to watch. Yes, the good doctor loves his old stories. But I wonder, would you like a closer look? Before Jake could answer, Throck was already walking toward the throne. His heavy footsteps echoed in the now quiet chamber. Jake followed, knowing that other beings were gathering to watch whatever was about to happen. You see, Throck continued as they got closer to the ancient seat. We have a tradition here. Every new species that joins the council is invited to test themselves against the throne. A harmless ritual, a way of showing respect to those who came before. Jake studied the Karathi general's face, reading the signs of mockery in the alien's expression. This was not a tradition. It was meant to humiliate him, a way of showing the newest species just how far they were from real power. Of course, Throck added with fake concern, if your species thinks this is too dangerous. The challenge was clear. Jake knew that backing down would prove everything the council believed about human weakness. He looked around the chamber, seeing the growing crowd of aliens gathering to watch what they clearly expected to be entertaining. I appreciate the offer, Jake said, stepping closer to the throne. Though I have to ask, what exactly happens when the throne rejects someone? Oh, nothing too bad, Throck replied, his scales now practically glowing with anticipation. A small energy shock, perhaps some minor mental feedback. Quite harmless, I promise. Dr. Veltran appeared beside Jake, looking worried. Captain Morrison, you should know that the throne's rejections have been different throughout history. While recent attempts have been mild, we cannot predict. The human will be fine, Throck interrupted. Unless, of course, he lacks the courage to try. Jake stared at the throne. Its black surface seemed to drink in the light around it. The golden lines pulsed steadily, and he could feel that strange warmth getting stronger as he got closer. Something deep in his mind whispered that this was important, that this moment would change everything. He had come here to represent humanity's best hopes for joining galactic civilization. Now he stood before a test that could either show human courage or become a warning about human pride. Either way, he realized there was no turning back. Jake Morrison took a deep breath and walked toward the Emperor's throne. The huge chamber became silent except for the soft hum of alien machines and quiet whispers from the watching crowd. Representatives from all 12 major species had somehow appeared to watch what they clearly expected to be a memorable failure. The throne stood before him like a mountain of black stone. The golden lines running through it pulsed faster as Jake got closer, creating patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. He could feel the weight of ancient power coming from the artifact, a presence so old and vast that it made him feel like a bug approaching a sleeping dragon. Any last words, human? General Throck asked, his scales now bright red with amusement. Several Karathi officers behind him made sounds that Jake thought might be laughter. Jake ignored the insult and kept walking. Dr. Veltran followed closely, holding a scanning device in one of his 4 hands. Captain, I am detecting significant energy changes. The throne appears to be waking up. Waking up? Jake stopped with one foot on the first step leading to the throne platform. Perhaps the wrong word. Veltran corrected, his face creased with worry. But the artifact is showing more activity than we have recorded in centuries. The power levels are climbing beyond anything in our database. Ambassador Kethavar floated forward quickly despite his ancient appearance. Dr. Veltran, what exactly are you saying? I am saying, the historian replied, his scanner beeping frantically, that the throne is responding to the human's presence in ways we have never seen. Every previous attempt triggered immediate rejection protocols. This is something completely different. A murmur ran through the assembled aliens. Jake caught pieces of conversation in languages he could not understand. But the tone was clear. Concern, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Impossible, Prime Merchant Zektil clicked, his many eyes reflecting the throne's golden glow. The human is barely evolved beyond their planet's primitive mammals. The throne was created by beings who had mastered the basic forces of the universe. Jake felt a strange tingling in his fingertips, as if the air itself was charged with electricity. The feeling got stronger as he climbed the remaining steps to stand directly in front of the throne. This close, he could see that the golden lines were not just decoration, but complex geometric designs that seemed to shift and flow like living circuit boards. The readings are off the charts, Dr. Veltran announced, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed chamber. Whatever is happening, it has never happened before. Then perhaps we should stop this experiment, Ambassador Kethavar suggested, though he made no move to interfere. No, Jake said firmly. I came here to represent humanity. If this is our test, then I will see it through. He reached out toward the throne's armrest, his hand shaking slightly. The moment his fingers touched the ancient stone, the world exploded into light and feeling. Images flooded Jake's mind in a river that threatened to drown his consciousness. He saw the galaxy as it had been long ago, young and wild, with species rising and falling like waves on a cosmic shore. He witnessed the architects in their prime, beings of pure energy who had moved beyond physical form, while somehow keeping their connection to the material universe. The throne was not just a seat of power, he realized. It was a test, a filter designed to identify something specific in those who approached it. Not technological advancement or military might or even wisdom, but something else entirely, something the architects had valued above all other qualities. Potential. The architects had seen far into the future, beyond their own inevitable passing. They had created the throne not for themselves, but for whoever would come after, whoever would inherit the responsibility of guiding galactic civilization through the challenges yet to come. They had built into it a recognition system so advanced that it could identify the spark of true leadership across vast differences in biology, psychology, and culture. Jake felt the throne measuring him, examining not just his thoughts and intentions but the very essence of what made him human. It looked beyond his individual abilities to the species he represented, weighing humanity's potential against an impossible standard. And somehow, miraculously, humanity passed. The throne's energy systems came fully online for the first time in 50,000 years. The golden lines blazed with light that made every being in the chamber shield their eyes. Power flowed through circuits that had been dormant since before most of the current species had evolved, and the ancient artifact began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced, a harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones and blood. It spoke of vast distances between stars, of the patient work of evolution, of civilizations that had touched the face of eternity. It was the song of the galaxy itself, and somehow Jake understood every note. The light faded gradually, leaving Jake standing before the throne with his hand still resting on its armrest. The chamber was absolutely silent. Every alien present stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something approaching awe. Impossible, Ambassador Kethavar whispered, the word barely audible. Dr. Veltran's scanner had stopped beeping. His forehands shook as he read the display. The throne has accepted him. Full integration, complete access to all systems. Captain Morrison, you are reading as the rightful emperor of the galaxy. Jake looked down at the throne, then back at the assembled representatives. He could feel the artifact's power flowing around him, could sense the vast networks of ancient technology hidden throughout the galaxy responding to his presence. With a thought, he could access star charts spanning millions of worlds. With another, he could monitor the health of entire civilizations. This has to be some kind of mistake, General Throck rumbled, his scales shifting through colors Jake had never seen before. The human cannot possibly... The throne does not make mistakes, a new voice interrupted. An elderly Vexhai that Jake had not noticed before stepped forward from the crowd. Unlike the other insects, this one moved with the careful precision of extreme age, and the other Vexhai immediately showed respect for his presence. Elder Kixmoth, Prime Merchant Ziktal said, his mouth parts clicking in what Jake recognized as respect. We did not know you were observing. I have been watching for longer than most of you have been alive, the ancient Vexhai replied. I was present when the throne last activated, nearly 3,000 years ago. The Karathi Emperor Gorthvin approached it with confidence born of conquest and military might. The throne's rejection nearly destroyed him. Elder Kixmoth's many eyes fixed on Jake with unsettling intensity. But this is not rejection. This is recognition. The throne has found what it was designed to find. And what is that exactly? Jake asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Hope, the elder replied simply. The architects built the throne to identify the species that would carry galactic civilization into its next phase of evolution. They were looking for potential, not achievement, promise, not power. Ambassador Kethavar floated closer, his ancient features tight with concern. Elder Kixmoth, surely you cannot suggest that we accept this cosmic accident as legitimate. The human species has barely learned to leave their birth planet. And yet, the elder pointed out, the throne accepts him while it has rejected emperors, generals, merchant princes, and philosophers for 50,000 years. Perhaps the question is not why it accepts him, but why it rejected all the others. Jake felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He could sense the throne's power waiting for his command, could feel the attention of every being in the chamber focused on his next words. The responsibility was staggering, the implications beyond anything he had imagined when he first volunteered for the diplomatic mission. I need to understand something, Jake said, addressing the assembled representatives. What exactly does it mean to be what Dr. Veltran said, Emperor of the Galaxy? The Emperor is the ultimate authority in matters of galactic law, Ambassador Kethvar explained reluctantly. They can override the Council's decisions, command the combined fleets of all member species, and set policy for billions of worlds. The position has been vacant since the throne last rejected a candidate 3,000 years ago. The Empire has been governed by the Council in the Emperor's absence, General Throck added, his scales now a troubled purple. But if the throne has truly chosen, the human would have absolute authority over all Council decisions. Jake looked around the chamber, seeing fear and uncertainty in the faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. He thought of Earth, small and blue and precious, carrying humanity's dreams among the stars. He thought of the responsibility he had accepted when he agreed to speak for his entire species. I think, Jake said carefully, we need to talk about what this means for everyone, because if I understand correctly, everything just changed. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the throne's power systems, ancient technology responding to the presence of its first accepted occupant in 50,000 years. In that moment, Jake Morrison, a human who had been born on a small planet circling an ordinary star, became the most powerful being in the galaxy, and he had absolutely no idea what to do next. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council started within hours of Jake's acceptance by the throne. The great chamber buzzed with worried energy as representatives from all 12 major species debated what had become known as the human incident. Jake sat in a simple chair beside the Emperor's throne, having politely refused to actually sit in it until he better understood the situation. Dr. Veltran had spent the time running every scan and test he could think of on both Jake and the throne. His findings, displayed on a massive holographic screen above the chamber, only made the mystery deeper. The genetic markers are unmistakable, Veltran announced to the assembly. Captain Morrison's DNA contains sequences that match patterns found in architect ruins across the galaxy. The probability of this occurring naturally is mathematically impossible. Ambassador Kethvar's forearms moved in agitation. Are you suggesting the human is descended from the architects? That is absurd. The architects transcended physical form millions of years ago. Not descended, Elder Kixmoth corrected from his position near the central podium. Guided. The architects did not simply vanish, Ambassador. They prepared for their departure by ensuring their successors would eventually emerge. General Throck's scales shifted to a deep red of anger. You speak of legends and fairy tales, Elder. The Karathi Empire has ruled through strength and honor for 20,000 years. We will not bow to some primitive mammal because an ancient machine malfunctions. The throne has never malfunctioned, Dr. Veltran said sharply. In fact, its diagnostic systems are more advanced than anything we currently possess. The integration it has achieved with Captain Morrison exceeds even our theoretical models of architect technology. Jake had been listening to the debate while also trying to process the flood of information flowing from the throne. It was like having a galaxy-spanning internet connected directly to his brain, and the sheer amount of data was overwhelming. He could see real-time reports from mining operations in distant star systems, weather patterns on agricultural worlds thousands of light-years away, and the locations of every military vessel in the galactic fleet. If I may interrupt, Jake said, standing slowly. The chamber fell silent as all attention turned to him. I think I'm beginning to understand what happened here. He gestured toward the holographic display showing his genetic analysis. Dr. Veltran is right about the genetic markers, but he is interpreting them backwards. The architects did not put their DNA into humans. They put human DNA into their technology. A ripple of confusion ran through the assembly. Prime Merchant Zichtel clicked his mouthparts impatiently. Explain. Jake moved closer to the throne, feeling its power systems respond to his nearness. The architects were time engineers as well as everything else. They could see potential futures, possible outcomes. When they designed the throne, they were not just creating a selection mechanism for existing species, they were creating a catalyst for evolution itself. Elder Kixmoth's many eyes glittered with understanding. Continue. The throne does not just recognize worthy leaders, Jake explained, his confidence growing as the pieces fell into place. It creates them. Over millions of years, it has been subtly influencing the development of species across the galaxy, guiding evolution toward a specific goal. Dr. Veltran's scanner beeped frantically as he pointed it at Jake. Captain, your neural patterns are changing. The throne is interfacing with your consciousness in real time, enhancing your cognitive capabilities. Jake nodded, feeling the truth of it. His mind was expanding, connections forming that allowed him to process information at speeds that should have been impossible, but it was not making him into something other than human. It was making him into the best possible version of what humanity could become. The architects seeded the galaxy with their technology, but they also seeded it with the potential for their successors. Jake continued. Every species represented here carries traces of that genetic guidance. But humans were their primary project. General Throck snarled, his massive form tensing for violence. You dare suggest that your pathetic species was chosen over the mighty Karathi? Not chosen over, Jake replied calmly. Chosen to unite. Look at the genetic patterns Dr. Veltran found. They are not just in my DNA. They are design templates for building bridges between species. The architects did not want another empire built on conquest and domination. They wanted something new. Ambassador Kethvar floated forward, his ancient features thoughtful. You speak of unity, human, but the galaxy has known only conflict for thousands of years. Species war over resources, territory, ideology. What makes you believe harmony is possible? Jake felt the throne's power flowing through him, and with it came visions of what the galaxy could become. He saw trade routes that brought prosperity to all species rather than enriching a few. He saw scientific collaboration that unlocked the secrets of the universe. He saw conflicts resolved through understanding rather than violence. Because, Jake said, that is what humans do. We are not the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but we are the best at finding common ground. We are the specialists in taking different groups and making them into families. He gestured toward the assembled representatives. Every species here has focused on perfecting themselves, becoming the ultimate expression of their particular strengths. The Karathi became the perfect warriors. The Zephyrians became the perfect diplomats. The Vexhi became the perfect merchants. But you all stopped growing, stopped changing. And humans? Elder Kixmoth asked quietly. Humans never stopped adapting. We are not the best at anything because we never focused on just one thing. We learned to be warriors when we needed to fight. Diplomats when we needed to negotiate, merchants when we needed to trade. We specialized in being generalists. Dr. Veltran looked up from his scanner, his expression full of awe. The genetic patterns are activating dormant sequences throughout the galaxy. I am detecting changes in representatives from every species present. Jake felt it too, a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The throne was not just enhancing his abilities. It was awakening something in every being present. Ancient genetic switches left by the architects were finally flipping, preparing the galaxy's dominant species for their next phase of evolution. The architects did not just want a leader, Jake realized aloud. They wanted to trigger a galaxy-wide transformation. They wanted to create something that had never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic civilization. Ambassador Kethvar's forearms trembled as he felt the changes beginning in his own body. This is unprecedented. I can feel my perception expanding, my understanding of other species deepening. General Throck roared in alarm as his scales began shifting through colors he had never experienced before, each hue representing emotional and mental states his species had thought impossible. What is happening to us? Evolution, Elder Kixmoth said with something approaching wonder. The next step that the architects prepared for us long ago. Captain Morrison, the throne chose you not because you were already worthy, but because your species could become worthy, and in doing so, help all of us become worthy. Jake felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had ever imagined. The throne pulsed with increasing energy, its systems fully online for the first time since the architect's disappearance. Through its networks, he could sense similar activation signatures from ancient devices hidden on worlds throughout the galaxy. The transformation was not limited to the council chamber. It was beginning everywhere at once, so what happens now? Prime Merchant Zigtal asked, his voice carrying new harmonics as his vocal cords evolved in real time. Jake looked around the chamber at beings who were becoming something more than they had ever been, while remaining true to what they had always been. The responsibility was staggering, but for the first time since approaching the throne, he felt ready for it. Now, Jake said, we learn what the galaxy looks like when everyone works together, and I suspect we are all going to be surprised by what we can accomplish. The throne sang again, its harmonic vibrations carrying across the galaxy through networks of ancient technology, announcing to every world and every species that the time of preparation was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and at its heart sat a human who had learned to carry the hopes of an entire galaxy on shoulders that had been shaped by evolution itself to bear exactly that weight. But even as the transformation began, Jake could sense something else through the throne's vast network, warning signals from the empty spaces between galaxies, where ancient enemies of cooperation itself were stirring. The real test was yet to come. 6 months after Jake Morrison's acceptance by the Emperor's throne, the galaxy was changing in ways no one could have predicted. The genetic awakening triggered by the ancient architect technology had affected every major species. But the changes were subtle and gradual, more like evolution than revolution. Jake stood in the redesigned council chamber, which now featured a circular arrangement of equal seats surrounding the throne. The old system that had governed galactic politics for thousands of years had given way to something unprecedented: true cooperation between species. The transformation had not been without challenges. The Karathi 7th Fleet is still refusing to acknowledge the new chain of command, reported Admiral Lisa Park, Jake's newly appointed military liaison. She was a former Earth Navy officer who had adapted remarkably well to interstellar politics. General Throck has been difficult, Jake nodded unsurprised. Of all the species, the Karathi were struggling most with the changes. Their entire culture was built around dominance hierarchies and military conquest. The genetic awakening was forcing them to develop empathy and cooperative instincts that felt alien to their warrior nature. Bring Throck here, Jake decided. It is time we had a direct conversation. Dr. Veltran, who had become Jake's unofficial advisor on architect technology, looked up from his latest readings. Captain, I should warn you that the Karathi general's transformation is progressing differently than the others. His species' aggressive nature seems to be complicating the process. Complicating how? The new neural pathways are developing, but they are in conflict with his existing instincts. He is experiencing what we might call cognitive dissonance on a biological level. His body is telling him to cooperate while his mind still thinks in terms of conquest. Jake felt a wave of sympathy for the Karathi general. Through the throne's enhanced perception, he could sense the emotional turmoil affecting individuals across the galaxy as they struggled to adapt to their evolving nature. It was like watching an entire galactic civilization go through adolescence. Ambassador Kethavar entered the chamber, his movements now carrying a grace that had not been there before the awakening. The changes in the Zephyrians had been among the most dramatic. Their already sophisticated diplomatic abilities had expanded to include an almost telepathic understanding of other species' emotional states. Emperor Morrison, Kethavar said, still adjusting to the new forms of address that had emerged naturally as the hierarchy reformed. I bring reports from the Outer Rim territories. Just Jake, please, Jake replied, as he had countless times before. What is the situation? The mining worlds are reporting unprecedented cooperation between species that have been enemies for centuries. Humans, Karathi, and Vexhai working side by side in operations that were previously segregated by species. Productivity has increased by 40%, and there have been 0 violent incidents. Elder Keeksmoth materialized from the shadows where he had been observing. The ancient Vexhai's transformation had been perhaps the most profound of all. His already vast intellect had expanded to encompass what could only be described as wisdom on a cosmic scale. The changes are accelerating, he observed. The architect protocols are adapting to each species' unique psychology, finding ways to integrate cooperation into existing cultural frameworks rather than replacing them entirely. Jake nodded, feeling the truth of it through his connection to the throne. The ancient device was not trying to make every species the same. It was helping each one become a better version of themselves while developing the ability to work with others. The chamber doors opened to admit General Throck, flanked by two of his Karathi subordinates. The massive reptilian moved with obvious discomfort, his scales shifting through patterns of color that suggested internal conflict. As he approached the throne, Jake could sense the war raging within the general's mind. "You summoned me." "Human," Throck growled, though the traditional contempt in his voice was mixed with something that might have been confusion. "I did," Jake replied calmly. "I wanted to check on how you are adjusting to the changes." Throck's scales flashed bright red with anger, then shifted to unexpected blues and greens that indicated distress. "You want to know how I am adjusting to having my mind violated by alien technology? To feeling emotions that no Karathi should experience?" "What emotions?" Jake asked gently. The general's massive form trembled with the effort of acknowledgement. "Concern. For species that are not Karathi. Guilt. For conquests that brought glory to my people. And something else. Something I do not have words for. Empathy," Dr. Veltran suggested quietly. Throck's scales went through a rapid series of color changes before settling on a deep purple that Jake had learned indicated profound uncertainty. "I find myself caring about the welfare of beings I was trained to see as prey or obstacles. It is disturbing." Jake stood and approached the Karathi general, feeling the throne's power allow him to perceive the biological and psychological changes occurring within Throck's massive frame. The transformation was indeed more complex than in other species, but it was also more necessary. "General, what made the Karathi great warriors?" Jake asked. Throck straightened with pride, his scales shifting to more familiar patterns. "Strength, honor, protection of our people, loyalty to our cause. And what if your people expanded to include every thinking being in the galaxy? What if your cause became the protection and prosperity of all species?" The question hung in the air as Throck processed its implications. Jake could see the moment when understanding dawned, when the general's evolving empathy connected with his deepest values and found harmony instead of conflict. "You are suggesting," Throck said slowly, "that the changes are not making me less Karathi, but more Karathi than I have ever been." "The greatest warriors," Jake observed, "are those who fight for something bigger than themselves." Throck's scales settled into a new pattern, one that combined the traditional Karathi colors of strength and honor, with new hues that spoke of understanding and cooperation. "I believe I'm beginning to comprehend. The empire I served was small. This is an empire worthy of the name." Admiral Park stepped forward with a datapad. "General, if you are ready to discuss the 7th Fleet's integration into the new command structure." "I am," Throck replied, his voice carrying new harmonics. "Though I suspect my warriors will need time to adjust as I have." "We all need time," Jake said, settling back beside the throne. "The architects designed this transformation to take generations, not months. We are just seeing the beginning of what we can become." Over the following hours, Jake met with representatives from dozens of species, each dealing with their own version of evolutionary growing pains. The Vexhi were struggling with new emotional depths that complicated their traditionally logical decision-making. The Zephyrians were overwhelmed by their enhanced ability to feel the emotions of others. Even humans were changing, developing new intuitive abilities that helped them serve as bridges between species. But gradually, a pattern was emerging. The initial chaos and confusion were giving way to something extraordinary, a galactic civilization that maintained its diversity while developing genuine unity of purpose. As the day's meetings concluded, Jake found himself alone with the throne, feeling its ancient power humming around him. Through its networks, he could sense the progress being made on thousands of worlds. Former enemies working together on massive construction projects. Scientists sharing discoveries that had been jealously guarded for thousands of years. Children of different species playing together in ways their parents would never have imagined. "Are you satisfied with our progress?" he asked aloud, addressing the long-vanished architects whose vision was finally coming to fruition. The throne pulsed with warm energy, and for a moment Jake could swear he felt the approval of beings who had transcended physical existence long ago. They had planted seeds across the galaxy and waited patiently for them to grow. Now finally their garden was beginning to bloom. But Jake also sensed something else through the throne's vast network, warnings of challenges yet to come. The transformation was proceeding faster than the architects had intended, accelerated by the unique qualities humans brought to the process. Other forces in the galaxy were taking notice, and not all of them welcomed the coming changes. Strange signals were being detected at the edge of galactic space. Ships unlike anything in the databases were approaching from the dark void between galaxies, and these newcomers, Jake realized with growing alarm, were not coming in peace. The age of cooperation had begun, but its survival was far from guaranteed. 1 year after the awakening began, the galaxy faced its greatest crisis in 10,000 years. Jake Morrison stood in the emergency command center that had been hastily built beneath the council chambers, surrounded by holographic displays showing the advancing threat that had emerged from the dark space between galaxies. "The extragalactic fleet is massive," Admiral Lisa Park reported, her voice tight with concern. "Our scouts count at least 50,000 vessels, and they are using technology we do not recognize. Their ships are absorbing energy from our weapons and converting it to fuel their own systems. The beings approaching their galaxy called themselves the Devourers, though Jake suspected that was more of a description than a name. Through the throne's expanded perception, he could sense their alien thoughts. Cold, calculating, and utterly without empathy. They had consumed dozens of galaxies over millions of years, harvesting not just resources but the very essence of the civilizations they encountered. "How long until they reach the outer rim?" Jake asked. Dr. Veltran looked up from his calculations, his forearms moving frantically over multiple control surfaces. "At their current speed, 6 months. But Jake, that is not the worst part. Their advanced scouts are broadcasting some kind of signal that is interfering with the architect technology." "Interfering how?" "The genetic changes we have all experienced are beginning to reverse. The unity we have built over the past year is starting to break down. Several species are already reverting to their pre-awakening behaviors." Jake felt the truth of it through his connection to the throne. Across the galaxy, the cooperative projects that had been flourishing were grinding to a halt as ancient prejudices and territorial instincts reasserted themselves. The Karathi 7th Fleet had already withdrawn from joint operations, and reports were coming in of Vex-High trade convoys refusing to transport supplies to Zephyrian colonies. General Throck entered the command center, his scales displaying the confused patterns that had become familiar during the early days of the transformation. "Emperor Morrison, I must report that my warriors are struggling. The emotions that allowed us to work with other species are fading. I can feel my old instincts returning. How are you handling it?" Jake asked. Throck's scales shifted to a determined pattern of deep blues and silvers. "I remember what it felt like to be part of something greater. Even if I cannot feel it as strongly now, I remember the truth of it. My warriors and I will honor our commitments. But I cannot speak for other Karathi commanders." Ambassador Kethvar glided into the chamber, his movements lacking the enhanced grace he had developed over the past year. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly. The Vex-High are withdrawing from the central sectors, and 3 Zephyrian colonies have declared independence from galactic authority." Elder Kixmoth appeared as if materializing from the shadows themselves. "The Devourers are not simply invaders," he said without preamble. "They are an immune response." "Explain," Jake requested. "I have been studying the architect records accessible through the throne. The Devourers are ancient, older than our galaxy itself. They serve a purpose: to prevent any single galactic civilization from growing too powerful, too unified. They appear whenever species begin to transcend their individual limitations and work toward true cooperation." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "You are saying they are specifically targeting what we have been building?" "More than that. They are designed to exploit the very unity that makes us strong. Their signal does not just interfere with the architect technology. It amplifies fear, suspicion, and tribal instincts. The more unified we were, the harder we fall when they arrive." Admiral Park pulled up a tactical display showing the galaxy's current defenses. "Even if every species contributed their full military strength, we could not match their numbers. And with cooperation breaking down, we need a different approach," Jake realized. He turned to the throne, feeling its ancient power calling to him. The architects knew about the Devourers. They must have planned for this. Dr. Veltran's scanners beeped frantically as Jake approached the throne. The artifact is changing again. I am detecting new systems coming online, configurations we have never seen before. Jake placed his hand on the throne's armrest and felt his consciousness expand beyond anything he had experienced before. This time, he was not just connected to the galactic network. He was touching something vast and timeless that existed outside normal space and time. The architects had not simply vanished, he realized. They had transformed themselves into something beyond physical existence, becoming guardians who watched over their younger siblings from dimensions beyond perception, and they had left instructions for exactly this situation. The throne is not just a leadership tool, Jake announced as understanding flooded through him. It is a weapon, but not the kind that destroys enemies. It is designed to transform them. Transform them how? General Throck demanded. Jake felt the answer flowing through him from the architect's final gift to the galaxy. The same way it transformed us. The Devourers have consumed so many civilizations that they have lost their own identity. They have become empty vessels driven only by hunger, but the throne can give them back what they have lost. Elder Kixmoth's many eyes glittered with understanding, empathy, purpose, the ability to see value in something other than consumption. The risk is enormous, Dr. Veltran warned. If the transformation fails, we will be defenseless. Jake looked around the command center at the representatives of species who had become family over the past year. Even as their enhanced abilities faded, he could see them making the choice to trust each other based on memory and hope rather than instinct. There is something else, Jake continued. The transformation has to be powered by genuine cooperation, not the enhanced unity we developed through the architect technology, but the kind we choose to maintain even when it is difficult. Ambassador Kethvar straightened, his diplomatic training overriding his fading emotional enhancements. You are asking us to work together precisely when our ability to do so is being stripped away. Yes, Jake confirmed, because that is the only way the architect's final protocol will activate. It requires proof that we have truly learned to choose cooperation over competition, unity over division. The next 5 months were the most challenging in galactic history. As the Devourer fleet approached, the fragile alliance held together through pure determination and remembered friendship. Species that could barely stand each other shared resources and battle plans. Ancient enemies fought side by side in defense preparations that everyone knew would be inadequate. Jake remained connected to the throne, feeling its power building toward some unimaginable culmination. Through its networks, he watched former rivals sacrifice for each other's welfare, saw individual beings choose the welfare of the galaxy over the interests of their own species. When the Devourers finally arrived at the Outer Rim, they encountered not the divided, fearful civilizations they expected, but a galaxy that had learned to find strength in its diversity. The first battle was a disaster for the galactic forces. Their weapons were indeed useless against the invaders' adaptive technology. But something unprecedented happened as the Devourer fleet pressed deeper into galactic space. Ships from dozens of species continued to work together despite suffering massive casualties. Rescue operations saw Karathi warriors dying to save Vexhi civilians they had never met. Zephyrian diplomats coordinated supply lines for species they had been at war with just years before. The throne responded to these acts of sacrifice and cooperation by releasing the architect's final gift, a wave of transformative energy that swept across the galaxy and beyond, reaching out to touch the consciousness of every Devourer ship and crew member. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers remembered what it felt like to create rather than consume, to build rather than destroy. The realization of what they had become over eons of endless hunger struck them with devastating force, but it also offered them a chance at redemption. The galaxy held its breath as the massive fleet came to a halt just short of the core worlds. Through the throne, Jake felt the moment when the Devourer commanders chose cooperation over conquest. When beings who had forgotten how to feel anything but hunger rediscovered wonder, curiosity, and hope. The war that everyone had expected never came. Instead, the Devourers asked for something no one had anticipated: forgiveness, and the chance to learn how to be part of a galactic community rather than its destroyer. Years later, Jake would look back on that moment as the true beginning of galactic civilization. Not when the throne accepted him, not when the awakening began, but when beings who had been enemies by nature chose to become family by choice. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis was stronger than anything the architects had originally envisioned. It included not just the species they had guided toward cooperation, but the ancient nomads who had learned to find purpose in creation rather than destruction. And at the center of it all sat a human who had learned that true leadership was not about wielding power, but about helping others discover the best versions of themselves. The throne had chosen him not because he was already worthy, but because his species had the potential.